Hey, what is going on, guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, we're going to be breaking down a couple of sleeper OP underrated builds, runes, champions for patch 9.8. So to start off here is going to be Jhin, and this is more so the new build going around right now on Jhin than himself. So there's this new Infinity Edge build where you go 2 Infinity Edges, so you just go for one right after that, and you just have 2 IEs, and it gives you a lot of attack damage in your build here. This is something that a lot of Jhin mains are doing right now. Taco, who's one of the best Jhin players in NA, is running this build right now, and he's having a lot of good success with it. So it's a pretty legit build right now, and you do lose a little bit of movement speed. You do lose a little bit of kiting potential because you're not going for a Zeal item as your second item, but you do gain a lot of damage. The amount of damage increase with this build is really good, and it does give you a very nice 2-item spike in the mid game. And then just to clarify for the build path for this new Jhin setup in this patch, you're going to want to go BF Sword as your first item. So even though on screen there it shows Swiftness Boots first, that's because Swiftness Boots are the first completed item. So you're going to go for BF Sword, then your tier 2 boots, then finish off Infinity Edge, grab another Infinity Edge, grab a Rapid Fire Cannon, and that's going to be your core build for this new Jhin build in this patch. Jhin did actually get buffed in this patch as well, so with that buff and then with this new build doing a lot better right now on Jhin, I think he's actually in a pretty solid spot for this patch. So if you're looking to pick up Jhin right now, then I don't think it's a terrible idea to do so. I think he's a pretty good AD carry for this patch. Obviously not one of the strongest, but he's also not as weak as he was in previous patches. So next up here is going to be Rumble, and this is more so for Rumble mid, but Rumble top lane also right now is very underrated in my opinion. But this Rumble mid pick, it's always been kind of a niche pick in solo queue. There's always been a couple of Rumble players, at least in higher elo, that do play him in the mid lane and do have a lot of good success with him. This champion did get buffed. I'm pretty sure it was last patch. His ultimate cooldown got decreased. His W's move speed also got increased, and this really helps out Rumble because it means that in the mid game there, you're going to be able to find a lot more picks. You're going to be able to use your ultimate a lot more often, and this is even better for mid lane Rumble, because with mid lane Rumble, whenever your ultimate is up, you want to be looking to use that. You want to be looking to roam down bot lane, try to use that there, or just solo kill your opponent. So because mid lane Rumble, he does have a lot more kill pressure, that ult cooldown decrease really does help him out get a better snowball going in the early game. There's also this setup right now where you go boots rush and you go 4 potions, and it really helps out Rumble in the early game because it allows him to dodge skill shots very easily with the move speed from his W and the boot start. It makes it very hard for like any skill shot champions to actually do too much against Rumble in the laning phase. And then when you go for the 4 potions there, it means that you're probably just not going to be able to get poked out in the laning phase due to your sustain. So it just allows Rumble to have a very strong laning phase even against champions who do outrange him. And then for rune choice on Rumble, you're either going to see Comet or Electrocute. I'd say Comet's going to be better in range matchups to where you're not going to be able to get auto attacks off on the opponent, because if you don't get an auto attack off, you're not going to proc Electrocute. You need your EQ auto attack to proc that. So if you're in a range matchup, I'd go Comet. If you're in a melee matchup to where you can look to proc Electrocute a lot more, then I would go for that. So down in the support role right now, I think Maokai support's probably the most underrated support right now for this patch. When you take a look at the most picked supports right now, you see a lot of these low mobility, heal shield, squishy supports being played. So your Soraka, your Sona, your Nami, your Janna, all these supports, they don't have any mobility in their kits. They're very easy to lock down for Maokai, and because a lot more junglers do tend to level 2 gank as well right now, the ability for Maokai to just easily flash W onto the enemy support or enemy AD carry, lock them down. He just has such good gank setup in his kit, so it just allows him to get a really good snowball going in the early game. And if you can get ahead on this Maokai support, your ability to zone in the laning phase is really good. If the enemy just makes one misstep in the laning phase, your ability to punish that with your flash W or even just walking up and using W is really good with Maokai. Now, a top lane pick for this patch that I think is very underrated is Camille right now, and Camille, especially over in Korea, you're seeing a lot more Kleptomancy Camille in the top lane. You're also seeing some press the attack, you're also seeing some conquer, but I think Camille in general, along with the Kleptomancy setup, is pretty underrated for this patch. So you're going to see this Kleptomancy into pretty much any melee tank matchup, so into something like a Sion, a Maokai, a Nasus, any matchup where you can consistently, easily proc Kleptomancy, it does very well on Camille right now. Other than that though, if you're in a bruiser matchup, if you're in a bit of a harder matchup, you can't proc Klepto a ton, then taking press the attack or taking conquer still does very well on Camille for this patch. And then interesting to note here, the best setup for the secondary runes on this page for Camille is Overheal and Bloodline. This does just give you a little bit more sustain in the laning phase with the Bloodline. With the Overheal there, it does give you a little bit more damage to absorb. So when you're going up against like tanks in the top lane, because they already don't do a ton of damage to you, the Overheal is really going to help you out, and it's going to allow you to duel them even better throughout the game. So this setup does do very well into those tank top lane picks. And then a mid lane pick here that I think is a very good counter pick into a lot of assassins in the mid lane is the Pantheon mid. So Pantheon mid for this patch does very well into things like Zed, Yasuo, Katarina. A lot of these most picked assassins for this patch, Pantheon can do great into. He also does have a very strong early skirmish. His 2v2 in the early game is very strong. So if you are going up against another assassin pick, most other assassins in the early game aren't very strong. They don't have the best 2v2 duel for the first few levels. So it just allows Pantheon to easily win that 2v2 at the Scuttle Crab, help his jungler get ahead in the early game. And then once you do at level 6 with Pantheon, your roaming potential, some of the best for any mid laner in the game with your ultimate. So I think overall right now, if you can use this Pantheon mid as a counter pick to a lot of these melee assassins, then he can be a great pick for 9.8. And then a jungle pick that does get a lot stronger in this patch for a few different reasons is Trundle jungle. So obviously Trundle got directly buffed in this patch with his ult and his Q buffs, and he also got indirectly buffed because we are seeing a lot more tank junglers now being played in 9.8. We're seeing a Mumu with his buffs being played more in this patch. We're also seeing more Sejuani because of her buffs. So the meta is slowly starting to favor Trundle a little bit again here. I don't think he's the best blind pick jungler for this patch. I still think that you probably wouldn't want to pick him blind, but using this Trundle pick as a counter in this patch to any tank jungler is a very good idea for 9.8. And then in my opinion, the most underrated AD carry for this patch is Kog'Maw. So Kog'Maw right now does pretty well in the current meta because he does benefit a lot from all those heal and shield supports being played right now. They just have very good synergy with Kog'Maw. They can keep him alive in mid to late game fights. And if Kog'Maw does not die in a mid to late game fight, then you have a very, very high chance of winning that fight. Also, the recently buffed Wit's End is really good on Kog'Maw as a second and third item, or second or third item. So he does great into like heavy AP enemy team comps. You can go Merc Treads, you can go Wit's End on Kog'Maw, and you're basically a tank AD carry, but you still pump out a load of damage. So if the enemy team comp does have something like a Vladimir top lane, if they got an AP mid laner as well, then Kog'Maw is a great pick in that situation. And you see a lot of players right now complaining about Vladimir as being a very OP pick for this patch. So if you are an AD carry player and you're having a hard time against Vladimir, then just going Kog'Maw, stacking an MR build of like Merc Treads, Wit's End, QSS is going to allow you to deal with that champion very well for 9.8. Now, Sejuani top lane is a pick that in the past did show up in certain metas, and in this patch now, with the W buffs to Sejuani, it does really help her out for the top lane. Obviously, Sejuani jungle is doing pretty well in this patch right now and does benefit from those buffs, but for top lane Sejuani, she's a pick that you really don't see often at all, and she's a pick that can really surprise the opponent as to like how much damage she can do in the laning phase, how tanky she is in the laning phase. You got your passive, so it's very hard for the enemies to actually straight up trade into you. If that passive is up, you're going to reduce a ton of damage. Also, when you proc your Aftershock, that's going to be more damage reduction there. So you're just very, very tanky on this Sejuani top pick, and you can also deal a ton of damage as well. Those W buffs really do help her out for this patch. So I think Sejuani top, very underrated pick for 9.8. And if you are looking for another good counter to a lot of these all-in assassin picks in the mid lane, Lulu is another great option. So she's more of, I guess, a more boring version of Pantheon. She doesn't have as much like kill pressure in the laning phase. She doesn't have as much solo carry potential, but she definitely does a good job at countering these assassin picks. So your Zed, your Aurelia, your LeBlanc, your Akali, all of these picks, Lulu does great into, because if they try to jump on you or your team, you just polymorph them, use your ultimate, use their shield. You make these champions very useless come the mid to late game especially. So as long as you don't die first few levels with Lulu, you can do great into those picks. And then lastly here, to round out the video, a tank top lane pick that is pretty underrated right now is Nautilus. So Nautilus down in the support role has already seen quite the resurgence for 9.8, also doing very well in the mid lane. But for top lane Nautilus, it's not really being played a lot right now for 9.8. If you are looking for a tank in the top lane, I do think Nautilus should be your go-to pick for 9.8. He did get those really nice buffs in this patch that do help him out a lot. So if you are looking for that tank for this patch, I would definitely recommend picking up Nautilus. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. Those are 10 champions in this patch that I think are the most underrated for solo queue for 9.8. So if you guys did enjoy this video, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you've yet to already. So thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.